to Northwest Newsweek, and thanks for being with us. The landscape through Dorion's highway corridor is expected to change as the project to the four-lane Highway 1117 gets closer. An open house was held Wednesday evening to showcase the changes that have been made since the last public meeting, which was held in 2016, which gave residents a preview of what the final product will look like. Adam Riley reports.
The nearly 3-kilometer stretch of Highway 1117 through Dorion is going to look a little bit different in a few years, not just because it will consist of 4 lanes, but because it will be a brand new corridor completely separate from where the highway runs now. According to Senior Project Manager Rick Inman, they're 75% of the way through the design phase. Inman says they are hoping to complete the environmental assessments later on this year.
What you see here today is pretty well the details of the final design for the most part. There still are some things we have to work through yet, which we will be doing throughout the summer. But generally speaking, this is the finer details of the preferred plan.
Some of those things that need to be worked through include agreements with landowners where the new highway will travel through. One of the big elements of the new highway is the removal of what Inman calls points of conflict, such as intersections. Residents and other shareholders who attended the open house were able to provide their insights for possible changes to the plan, but for some, they feel those comments will be disregarded.
It's just a show. You're not really being heard.
For 20 years, Dean Schaff has been Dorion's fire chief, and in that time he has seen his fair share of highway collisions. Schaff has several concerns over the design of the highway through Dorion, specifically from a community safety perspective. He says the loss of those intersections will result in increased response times due to limited access.
Small municipal fire departments like ours have a great area to cover, a large area. We only have one fire hall which covers like a vast area. Just in municipal roads we have 50 kilometers. Now you count in highways and things like that, and anything that slows down response time slows down response time.
Schaff also says the twinning is being pitched in a way that will have a positive effect to the area, but he feels it will provide limited economic benefit to the community.
Our community is suffering economically because of lack of business. This highway is going to make it easier for tourists and other businesses just to travel through our community and never have a reason to stop.
Dorion Reeve Ed Chambers is happy with how much the consulting has progressed, but admits there were some issues in the process.
There was one issue at one intersection that we thought certainly could have been changed, and it would be a safer intersection on the railroad with an extension of Poplar Lane. However, those discussions took place, and we'll just see how that materializes.
Chambers says had the plans been changed for that intersection, it would allow for future economic development for Dorion along Lake Superior. If all goes according to schedule, contractors are expected to have shovels in the ground for the Dorion 4-laning starting in 2019. Adam Riley, TBT News.
Well, the province has put a hold on admissions at Rainy Crest Long-Term Care in Fort Francis. In a strongly worded letter from the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care Director Eric Hoskins, conditions at the facility are being labeled deeply concerning. Several issues of non-compliance related to infection prevention and control, 24-hour registered nurse staffing, and duty to protect from abuse and/or neglect are among numerous concerns. The license for the facility is held by Riverside Healthcare Facilities Incorporated. TBT News attempted to reach President and CEO Ted Scholten for a response, but he was unavailable for comment. A dispute has broken out in the city of Dryden, and the Volunteer Firefighters Association has announced they'll be suspending services immediately following the dismissal of 3 of their senior members, including a captain with 18 years of experience. The association says its members have no confidence in the fire chief, and they claim the dismissal was initiated by the chief, the city's CAO, mayor, and council. Dryden officials say volunteers at the No. 2 Fire Hall will continue to respond to emergency calls. The nearby Oxdrift and Wabigoon fire departments will also be available to assist the Dryden Fire Service through their mutual aid agreements. It's a recommendation from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is now being fulfilled by the Ontario government. The Wynne Liberals announced just under $3 million Friday to expand Indigenous child and family services across the Northwest. 5 Indigenous organizations will use the money to expand off-reserve programming for families and child care programs. Shaoli Lee explains.
According to the Ontario government, spending $2.9 million on Indigenous family and child programming isn't just truth and reconciliation in action. It's also an investment in the Northwest's youth.
One can look at it from a statistical point of view or just from an anecdotal point of view, that when children are given child care at an early change in their life, the start in their life, it makes a huge difference in the future. And that's what we want. We want successful adults. We want people to be able to value themselves and recognize the needs that are going to be part of an adult life.
The 5 groups getting funds across the Northwest are the Thunder Bay Indigenous Friendship Center, Geraldton's Thunderbird Friendship Center, Daliko Anishinaabeg Family Care, the Anishinaabe Mushkiki Clinic, and Bingwi Nayashi Anishinaabeg First Nation. The money comes from the Ministry of Education, which has allocated $57 million to go to Indigenous family and child care programs province-wide. The $2.9 million announced today is to be spread over 2 years and will be administered by the District Social Services Board. DSAB Administrator Bill Bradica says he's pleasantly surprised as many as 5 programs received funding.
It's quite significant that it's much more than we had hoped for to be selected. Would have maybe expected 1 or 2, but to have 5 is quite amazing.
One of the groups benefiting is Anishinaabe Mushkiki nurse practitioner-led clinic. Director Michael Hardy says they currently offer prenatal programs for expecting moms, but will now expand that to families with newborns up to age 6.
So the exciting part of it for me is that we're now going to be able to equip some kids with tools to be successful in school, and parents to know that their kids can be successful if they continue to work with the programs and continue to have that support.
Shaoli Lee, TBT News.
1 man is dead following a highway collision near Kenora Friday morning. A pickup truck collided with a transport on Highway 17 east of Willard Lake. The male driver of the pickup was pronounced dead in hospital, while the 2 people in the transport suffered minor injuries. The highway was closed for the majority of the day while OPP investigated. The ongoing battle between the province and a group of property owners on Walker's Lake near Schreiber was up for debate in the Ontario legislature this week. Residents along the lake have been protesting their skyrocketing property assessment values and looking for help from the municipality, MPAC, and provincial politicians. In 2016, the residents temporarily blocked traffic on Highway 17 to get their message heard and later met with officials from MPAC. Then in December, the coalition of residents met with municipal officials only to find out there isn't much the municipality can do, as the guidelines have been laid out by the province and MPAC. Most recently, residents brought their issues directly to Premier Kathleen Wynne at her town hall event here in Thunder Bay. At Queen's Park Thursday, Finance Minister Charles Sousa was put up in the hot seat.
These residents have seen the MPAC assessments skyrocket by an average of 250% with no explanations, to compare to the provincial average increase of only 20%. Mrs. Scott's house has been assessed at almost $100,000 more than another nearby house twice its size.
I appreciate and recognize the concerns they have. We have a property on Walker's Lake in Schreiber assessed by MPAC as was proposed through the Provincial Land Act so that we can provide fair assessments. More importantly, this family and their neighbors are assessed in comparison to some of the values of sales that have happened in their respective area. But when you look at the unincorporated areas and elsewhere within the region, they are higher valued. And they have a right to be concerned in terms of what is taking place.
Meanwhile, MPP Michael Gravel says he'll continue to put the pressure on his government to find a solution to sky-high property reassessments at Walker's Lake near Schreiber. This despite the fact the residents have turned an NDP member instead to help them in their fight. MPP Michael Mantha hosted a news conference in Toronto Thursday with the Scott family. Keith Scott says his 84-year-old mother can no longer afford to stay in her modest lakefront home because MPAC is raising her property assessment from $78,000 to $186,000. Scott presented comparisons to larger, newer homes in Schreiber, which have lowered assessments. And he says Gravel and the Wynne Liberals have done nothing so far to change the situation.
She's heartbroken, Mr. Mantha. This is the end of the rope for us. We don't have any options. The options are that we walk away and lose what you've built for 60 years, because Kathleen Wynne, quite frankly, won't even come to the table.
I met with Mr. Scott and his family yesterday when they were in the legislature and spoke to the Minister of Finances. I have been for some time advocating for some change in the way that MPAC is implemented. So when we look at a situation such as Walker's Lake, there's no question. It's just simply not fair. And I'm doing whatever I can and have done to advocate with MPAC itself directly, and as I said, with the Minister of Finance, to find some way to resolve this so that fairness can be brought back into play.
3 people were hospitalized last weekend following 2 separate snowmobile collisions in the Thunder Bay district. The first occurred late Saturday morning south of Chappaqua. A snowmobile struck a tree about 17 kilometers into the bush, leaving the 2 occupants with serious injuries. Some Good Samaritans transported a Superior North EMS paramedic to the scene and helped get the victims to an air ambulance and a land ambulance. Later that same day, west of Schreiber, one man was seriously injured when his snowmobile was struck from behind by another machine. He was also taken to hospital. EMS Chief Wayne Gates says all of the patients are alive because they were wearing helmets. The Canadian Association for Retired Persons hosted rallies across the country this past week, including here in the Northwest. The group is lobbying for legislation that better protects pensioners when a corporation becomes insolvent or bankrupt, like the financial downfall of Sears last year. Local MP Patty Haidu met with a CARP representative on Tuesday. Carlisle Facette reports.
The financial collapse of Sears Canada left more than just empty storefronts in malls nationwide. Because of the way creditors and executives are prioritized during the bankruptcy process, Sears pensioners claim they lost out on nearly $300 million from their pension fund. Meanwhile, nearly $3 billion in dividends were paid out to shareholders, and all of that is perfectly legal.
It's a rather refined point of finance as to how pensions are given priority in the bankruptcy process in Canada.
Renee Larson, speaking on behalf of the Canadian Association for Retired Persons, met with local MP Patty Haidu to discuss legislative measures that can be taken to help prioritize pensioners during the bankruptcy process.
The whole purpose of this is to move the pensioners up to the top of the list so that their pensions are secure for the future. Many of them have worked 30, 40 years of their life and contributed to the well-being of the company, and they're relying on their pension in their retirement.
This meeting was just one of many taking place across the country between CARP representatives and Liberal MPs. Haidu says she will take the pensioners' concerns back to Ottawa and says there are measures being taken under the current legal framework to help address these issues, such as enhancements to CPP.
Moving from seniors receiving roughly a quarter of their earnings to a third of their earnings over time. That's the protection of the future generations to come and making sure that CPP keeps up with the cost of living. And so, as I said, I've committed to bringing back the information about addressing private sector pensions, but in the interim, the tools that we're taking reflect our concerns around seniors' retirement as well.
Carlisle Facette, TBT News.
Coming up after the break, PC leadership candidates pay a visit to the Northwest. The former head of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party has been given the green light to run in the PC leadership race. Party officials made that announcement earlier this week. It comes after Patrick Brown resigned his post 3 weeks ago amid allegations of sexual misconduct and was subsequently dismissed from party caucus. But in a surprise move, Brown announced his plan to try and reclaim his former role just before last Friday's deadline to enter the leadership race. Brown is now the second of the 5 declared candidates who have been vetted and cleared by party leadership. The other, Caroline Mulrooney, met with PC supporters in Thunder Bay Tuesday evening. Shally Lee reports.
Caroline Mulrooney has a message for Northern Ontario. If elected, keeping the cost of living and doing business down would be among her top priorities.
People here work very hard. This is a very entrepreneurial area. People have great ideas. They want to be able to work here and live here and have their families here, grow their businesses here. And so I am committed to making sure that they have the opportunity to do that and that the government doesn't get in their way.
Dozens filled Sleeping Giant Brewery to hear what Mulrooney says she would do if elected as PC leader, then premier. She's pledged to double the amount of money the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund receives from $100 million a year to $200 million. Mulrooney says she would also open the fund's eligibility up, freeing money up for more projects, but says she wants to hear from local representatives on what those projects could be.
I want to be open to listening to people here about what they feel has been lacking and where they feel like they have not had the opportunity to access these funds. So I'm open to talking to people across the north to find out what they'd like to see.
That commitment is part of why Kenora Rainy River candidate Greg Rickford says he's given Mulrooney his endorsement.
I felt like, as I said earlier tonight, that Caroline represented the complexion and the face of what I believe a new Ontario legislature should look like, and a progressive Conservative Party.
But Thunder Bay Superior North candidate Derek Parks, who is supporting Patrick Brown for leader, says the promise is already a part of the People's Guarantee, a policy platform first developed under Brown.
Funnily enough, it was the same commitment that Patrick Brown put out on Saturday that I faxed to you guys and the other reads. So, I mean, at least regardless of who's going to be leader, that commitment to double the Heritage Fund is great.
Dozens of supporters waited for hours for the chance to meet the leadership hopeful, some just to reminisce. This man endorsed Brian Mulrooney for the 1980 Federal Conservative Leadership Convention and still remembers that race today.
Lots of memories from 1980 and when we both had a little more hair and a little less stomach.
Thunder Bay is Mulrooney's final stop on her northern tour before returning to Toronto. Meanwhile, rival leadership candidate Christine Elliott comes to town Thursday. Shally Lee, TBT News.
Now, on the other side of things, she's a former MPP, former deputy party leader, and according to her supporters, Christine Elliott is the only PC leadership hopeful with the experience to beat the Liberals in June's provincial election. Elliott met with local supporters in Thunder Bay on Thursday and doubled down her opposition to the proposed carbon tax. Elliott says not only can Ontario not afford it, she'd consider joining Saskatchewan in suing to stop federal carbon pricing. Shally Lee has more.
Christine Elliott isn't just against the carbon tax. If she's made Premier of Ontario, Elliott says she'd consider fighting federal attempts to introduce carbon prices in the courts.
I think that we need to look at that, yes. I think Saskatchewan is doing that. Jason Kenney is looking at that in Alberta. I think that we cannot just sit by and let Justin Trudeau tell us what we have to do in Ontario. I think there's questions as to the constitutionality of what he's proposing, and I think we fight back for Ontario.
Elliott was in Thunder Bay to rally support for her bid for the PC party leadership. Speaking to progressive Conservative supporters on Thursday night, she says ordinary Ontarians and businesses are stretched too thin and can't afford a carbon tax. Derek Parks is the PC candidate for Thunder Bay Superior North. Parks endorsed Elliott after Patrick Brown resigned in January, but is now supporting Brown after his entry into the race. Parks says it's not possible to deliver on other PC promises without the carbon tax.
I'm having a very hard time listening to the other leadership candidates talk about we're going to follow the People's Guarantee, but we're scrapping the carbon tax when the People's Guarantee is priced out and approved by a Liberal, that our numbers are correct. The carbon tax funds the platform that we currently have.
Elliott disagrees, saying a line-by-line audit of the provincial budget could find the money needed. She also said she'd take a closer look at the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund budget, but says she's not ready to commit to doubling it, as some rivals have. Elliott also slammed provincial Liberals for dragging their feet on developing the Northern Ontario Ring of Fire and pledged to start action on roads into the ring.
I think that's where it has to start. We need to define exactly the location of the roads, get them built, and start working on the development of the project. But you can't do it until you have transportation there.
Elliott will visit Owen Sound on Friday before continuing further south. Meanwhile, embattled former leader Patrick Brown comes to Thunder Bay next week. Xiaoli Li, TBT News.
Coming up next, students at Mind Center School have figured out a way to go on field trips without even leaving the classroom. Stay with us. Students at Mind Center School, located halfway between Atikokan and Fort Frances, are going on field trips without even having to set foot outside the classroom. It's all thanks to new technology aimed at defeating isolation and improving access to extra content for teachers. Adam Riley has more.
In Mind Center, Ontario, things can be quiet. So quiet you can't help but get a feeling of isolation, especially for the 68 students of Mind Center School. However, some new technology is helping connect the students with the world beyond the region. This telepresence unit, provided by Cisco Systems, allows students the opportunity to have special guests visit or to go on a field trip across the country or even the world without leaving the classroom. Principal Barb Dennis says the content is provided through an agency called Taking It Global, which has helped provide more custom teaching options for teachers in the school.
The teachers meet with a representative from Taking It Global, and she is a retired teacher. So she has a look and talks with the teachers about the programming that they might like to see, and it's connected to whatever curriculum studies they're doing right now.
The options, topics, and presenters available for teachers and students is almost limitless. Grade 6, 7, and 8 teacher Ron Cameron says his students get a session with a presenter usually once every 2 weeks.
It's still such an awesome experience to get to talk and see all of the things that, that they could possibly not get a chance to go see. I mean, I'm probably never going to go to the Kennedy Space Center, but, we were able to do that. So I think it's pretty special, and it kind of gives you that next level or layer of connectedness instead of just watching a video, you get to actually interact.
I like the Toronto Art Gallery because they took us through different exhibits and we got to ask questions about different pieces and we stayed in our classroom.
Speaking to students, actor J.T. Turner retells the tales of Aesop, a storyteller from ancient Greece. He says from an office in Massachusetts, he is able to help teachers in regions far outside of his normal reach.
This technology is newer to me, and it's wonderful. In the past, what I've had to do with performing is travel, and I love to travel, but I would go to a school maybe a half day away. With this, I am able to chat with one school in the morning and another school at another part of the world in the afternoon.
Mind Center School is only a K-8 school. However, access to the Taking It Global service doesn't end there, as Fort Frances High School, where these students will go to continue their education, is also connected to the network, providing more options for future generations. Adam Riley, TBT News.
And that's going to do it for this week's edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Leanne Evans. Thanks for being with us, and be sure to tune in next time.